Hi everyone, we are in week 8 of community wellness, and this week deals with disaster planning. And I want to first talk about the assignments that are still um, due, and also how I did extend some of the due dates. So um, for the online group, the community agency assessment is due on May 30th at the latest, and the health ed module is due on June 6th. So you can certainly turn them in earlier, but I decided to give everyone in both my face-to-face group and the online course an extra week for each assignment, as I'm moving through them and won't get them done all in one day for grading anyway. So if you need a little bit extra time as you're trying to finish things off for this course, that's fine. So I want to highlight a few things in the content for disaster planning. There is a discussion post that's due, and it's an interesting one. It asks you to take your community that you completed your assessment on and think about what their needs are as far as a disaster training program um, would be. So what would benefit, again, a disaster program or another training program that would benefit the community? And my face-to-face group, I'll give you a couple of examples that were real interesting because they were really different. One of them looked at the issue of, it's in Oconomowoc, in the issue of the railroad tracks going right through the middle of town without lights or bars, safety bars. So that certainly was something that I think is real significant. And then another student looked at a community where they've recently recognized the heroin problem that's occurring and drug overdose and even death. So both of those are real interesting areas that that can certainly benefit from some focus on them. The thing I liked about the heroin issue was that her plan was really to work with the schools and then engage parents in an education program to recognize kids that are using. And, all parents, they don't want to believe something like that is going on in their home. And um, I've also read recently that kids that are using get really, um, they're very good at hiding the issue that they are doing drugs. So I think working with families and the school personnel over an extended period of time to get them educated and really aware of the problem is very helpful. So as you look through the PowerPoints for disaster planning, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that I think are important. One of the additions that I made right away is that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, um, it was created through the Homeland Security Act in 2002, and you can imagine following 9/11, consolidated 22 previous agencies into one unified organization. And their mission is to develop and coordinate the implementation of a comprehensive national strategy to secure the U.S. from terrorist threats or attacks. When we look at disasters on page 2, just remember that they can be uh, both man-made, um, war, chemical or biological terrorism. Those are just two examples. And then certainly natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, as we've seen. Um, and, if you think, we can certainly see then combinations as well. If you think about flooding that occurs, and we're seeing that now in Oklahoma and Texas, when those waters recede, um, one of the things that I've heard that is a little alarming is that, first of all, there's a lot of snakes and other vermin in the area, and workers have to really be careful so they don't get bit or contaminated by these um, animals that come out after the floodwaters recede. And then when you have floodwater, it causes, you can have then secondary bacterial infections and also the growth of mold. So we really have to look at all the different levels of issues that we're dealing with. And I think one of the other things that's important as the PowerPoint points out is that the amount of technology we have today makes things very difficult because it's very expensive and it takes a long time to get everything back up to date and running. So those are just some of the issues to think about. Um, as you move through on page 3, some of the important things to consider when we look at the population affected is their vulnerability. So we have to look at their age, and certainly when we see individuals at either ends of the age spectrum, they're the ones that are most at risk. If they have pre-existing health conditions, if they're, what's their mobility, and their emotional stability also is important. Think of all the individuals with mental health illnesses that are living in our communities today. In the environment where are chemicals stored, and then we have to really consider, again, what's the availability of water, food, and utilities during that time. And as we all kind of smile when we talk about public health, is there an issue with waste disposal, and is that going to be compromised? Um, the warning time and how close it is to the community is important. Do they have an extended warning time that they know something is going to occur, or does it just blow up and happen? And then the individual's perception, again, their coping abilities, personal losses that they may be facing. Have they had previous experience? And one of the quotes that I thought was real interesting is that says, the human mind allows perceptions to only be as disastrous as the mind can cope with at the time. So that's kind of a revelation, I think. Just moving through some things I wanted to point out to you that I think are important when you look at page 7. Please go to your textbook on page 252 and 253 and review the personal checklist that you should be familiar with prior to a disaster, and also emergency supplies that you should have in your home. I found this very interesting. I have to admit I am nowhere near being ready, but this is something that we can use as an excellent resource to really prepare ourselves professionally and personally. We have to protect our family. A couple of other things that I thought were interesting too is that when there's a disaster, the locals really will deal with it, and they will set up an emergency operations center. So they're going to go in and they're going to assess the immediate level of danger. They're going to provide first aid and rescue, and assess costs, health risks, and injury, and then how many lives were lost. And if they can deal with it, and again, all these units they have their own authority, but they work together. Again, fire and police, public health, public works, emergency services that move in like the American Red Cross. And they're just wonderful. They are responsible for shelter, um, setup and management, getting food and water, and helping people connect with family members. They're just excellent. And again, that comes straight from our history, that this organization has been around for a long time, and it was, again, Clara Barton that organized the American Red Cross in 1881. And if needed, the military will help with setting up things like tent cities if really it's such a devastating circumstance. When the locals are overwhelmed, then they go to the governor and they request assistance. And then you're going to have an emergency operations center that is organized at the state level. And then if that continues and we still are seeing more of a need, they go to the feds. And this is where they pull in the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Centers for Disease Control. Two other things that I thought were real interesting when I was reading in the textbook. There are two programs. One of them is called BioWatch, and this is an early warning system for biothreats, and it tests the air in major metropolitan areas, which I thought was fascinating. And the other one is called BioSense, and this is a data sharing program to facilitate surveillance of unusual patterns or clusters of disease. And when the threat is chemical, think back to our first week. The agency that's responsible for moving in and conducting surveillance or whatever they need to assess and provide a remedy is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. So think of that. That's one of the agencies that we talked about the first week when we started this course. So they are again, I always find it fascinating as we move through community health that we're going to see these different agencies and they will have an impact, on the health and well-being of communities. So um, read the chapter on disaster management. It isn't very lengthy, and I think it's an excellent review. We all have to be ready for these kinds of things. We never know when something is going to happen. And again, please post on the discussion board. Think about what kind of program you can develop. And I will, again, see you next week as we move into our last couple of weeks of this course.